I'm less familiar with Zoom, but I know it's not rocket science, so I can do this. Okay, hi everyone. I've met, I think, most of you before in reviews. Doug very recently had you in a review. Leanne, you too. Hello. So I'm Anna Abraham, Field Manager for the Citizen Review Board. I oversee Marion County, as you know, but I also have Polk County now. So I get to have both, two very different places that are so close to each other. So they're just such different, unique counties. It's fun working in both of them. I think that, I mean, most of you are pretty familiar with who we are. I can't see everyone's faces, but has anyone here not been through a Citizen Review Board hearing or submitted a report to the board? Anyone who hasn't? I think everyone has. But so great. So I don't know that I necessarily need to go into a deep dive of like who we are, but I'll just reiterate that we are a program of the court, as you hear us read before every review. We do not work for DHS. Our volunteers are sworn in by the Chief Justice and the presiding judges of each county that they serve. In Marion County, we have 5 boards, 2 of which are focused on teens and young adults, and the other 3 focus on the younger children in care. Our role, our mandate is pretty much twofold: to facilitate timely and thorough judicial reviews of children in foster care to ensure that those time standards are met. Usually that means you can expect about every 6 months, you'll either have a permanency hearing or a CRB in Marion County. That's a pretty solid rhythm we've got going on. Occasionally I get a note from a judge that's like, hey, we want you, this case had some concerns, so we want you to review it sooner, like within 3 months. So we'll do that. We'll always do that. And if a CASA or any party to a case ever wanted an earlier review for their case, that can always be requested and granted by me. I'll find a way to put your case on the schedule. So if you find that you're working on a case and you think it's been a while since there's been a hearing, or there's just a lot going on and you'd like to see there be a quick review, or not a quick one, because you know none of our reviews are quick, but one scheduled maybe more quickly than the court can schedule it, you can always email me directly or have your supervisor do that and request a review. And you can expect, if you do that, that it would take about a month and a half to probably get it on the schedule, depending. So the other piece to our role as a program and in the system has to do with systemic change. So a lot of that takes place at reviews, I would say, but it's another big part of my job outside of the context of CRB reviews. So CRB reviews are what everyone associates us with, but we do a lot of other stuff as a program too, as staff. We have a lot of initiatives and strategic planning projects that we're working on. One that I'm leading, for example, on a statewide level, is improving our process for teens and young adults in foster care. So I've formed a committee of various stakeholders throughout the state: DHS staff, attorneys, DD workers, foster parents, CASA representatives, board members, one judge. And we're working together over the course of a year to develop this guide to improve our review process to ensure that teens and young adults are getting what they need in foster care. So systemic change and improvement is another big part of who we are as a program. And it's one that people know less about. So if you ever have more questions about that or want to hear more about the various projects we're doing throughout the state, I can send you that information. So that's just a little summary of who we are. And Dennis and I talked about having me talk a little bit about how we are starting to review cases of children who are placed in home with their parents. Is this news to you that we're starting to do that, or did you get Dennis, did you send them those materials that I sent you? Fantastic. So those will really answer all your questions. I didn't make them, but one of my wonderful colleagues did, and I thought she did a really good job. So any question you have about it is probably outlined in those documents. I won't go through them like point by point because that would be really boring. But what I can tell you is that one of the reasons why we decided to restart reviewing these, because apparently a while back, I'm trying to think of how long back, 15 years ago, maybe, we already were reviewing these cases. And then for some reason, we stopped. And it's my understanding that it was because there was some larger legal determination that it wasn't there was like a legal interpretation of our statute that resulted in us not reviewing cases of children who are in trial reunification. That review was sort of redone recently, and it came about because we also, I should say, we collect a lot of data as a program. So if you're ever interested in learning about some statistic that you think might be interesting to learn about, I could go on and on all about it. We collect a lot of data as a program. So you might find some of the things that we collect interesting, and that's all things I can share as well. But my point is, we collected data and found that on a statewide level, the court was not meeting the requirement of reviewing children who enter trial reunification within 60 days of being placed back with their parent. That's an important requirement. Marion County is meeting those requirements, and has been. So Marion County is doing a great job. The court does a great job in Marion County of meeting that requirement. On a statewide level, though, there was a problem. And that's why our program decided to kind of start this conversation again of, hey, can we help fill in this gap? Because it's not like we think that judges don't want to review these cases. More often it's probably because they don't have time. Their dockets are slammed. And especially in smaller counties where, there's like one judge reviewing everything, that's very challenging. So this is an area where the CRB can help. So that's kind of how this came about. There was another legal determination and interpretation that actually it is within our statute to review these cases. So we're kind of slowly rolling that out. I have not had any in Marion County yet. I've had a couple in Polk County. Don't know why that is. We started to be allowed to review them as of January this year. This is going to sound more confusing than it actually is, but for scheduling purposes, we aren't like actively scheduling them yet. It's more like if a case gets put on our schedule, and then between the time that the schedule's made and the actual review date, the child goes home, we will still review that case. Maybe you've been on cases before where that review would then get canceled. Those reviews are no longer canceled. We review those now. Come August of this year, I will start actively scheduling those. So if I get a bunch of materials, I look at them, I say, oh, these kids are in home, but the case is still open. If it's due for review, I'm still going to schedule it. So you'll probably start to see more of those on schedules. I guess that would put it at about October. Have any of you worked on a case, or are you actively on a case where there is a trial reunification going on? You can maybe virtually raise your hand okay. Has anyone worked on cases where, I don't know how many cases y'all have had, where a kid has gone home and you've remained the CASA during that trial reunification period? Yeah. What was that like? Do you mind me putting you on the spot? Like, what was your experience as a CASA? Did the kid stay home and the case close, or did the kid come back into care?
I'm still on it.
Okay.
There's 4 kids that have been slowly like being reunited. She has all of them now. And it's taking a really long time to close it because I think the biggest challenge is she has a lot of resources while it's open, and then it's going to be hard for her to honestly, it's going to be really hard for her to be able to do all of it without all the resources she's given. So because her, the DHS caseworker is still really involved, and so she has a lot of services through that. That's all. I mean, I think that's a challenge because she's working really hard to keep her kids and to meet all the requirements of her. And but when she loses all those resources, I think it's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
And so it's been probably over a year since the first one,
Oh.
and we're still, and it's been the fourth one went home um in the fall, and well, in November, I think. So,
Mhm.
and it's every time we talk about, I mean, every time they talk about ending it, it's like, not
Mhm.
so. It's got its own
Yes.
challenges.
Yes. Thank
Um,
you. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
I also had one. I actually came into the case when they were in the trial reunification, and it's
Oh,
gone really well. The case is expected to close within the next 30 to 60 days. I understand what April's saying. There's a lot of services and then that are helping out, but with this particular family, they've been going through them, and it's busy for them, but they've been doing it, and they've been doing a great job. So
wonderful.
I will say this answers the question. I'm like, did I come in just after the CRB or what? So this answered that question as to why I hadn't seen the CRB. So
Yeah. Yes. Yes. If for some reason your case, like April, we may end up seeing yours eventually, depending on how long it takes to close. I think
We were
when
in
I
with you in the fall. We did just have a CRB hearing in the fall.
okay. For the ones that haven't been, yeah, the ones that were still in care. Yeah. Yeah.
It was right at the, actually, that hearing was kind of critical in deciding to reunite the last, they were a big part of making the decision to reunite the last child.
Oh, good.
It was a
Well, I hope
recommendation from the CRB hearing.
good. Well, I hope that's good. I mean, it sounds like
I mean,
it's
I do
moving in
think
a
it's
positive
good. I
direction.
think she's going to be able, I mean, she's a single mom with a total, with 4 boys, but she is working really hard too. And I think it'll be like, hopefully like the other gentleman just spoke of his, I think she will keep all of her kids, but I do just see that there's so many resources for them while they're in the system that they lose once it's closed out. So
yes. Yes. It's it's a tough time. It's a really critical time in cases. And so I'm glad that we're going to be reviewing them. And I'm very glad that there are CASAs still on those cases that see it through all the way to case closure. That's huge. So, okay. So, when you are on a case and you see that you have a CRB coming up in the cases, even just one, I mean, this will be okay. I should actually start with this. This is new for all of us. So you may find like, ooh, that was kind of a bumpy CRB. And it's because we're kind of figuring out how to do these reviews ourselves, especially the ones where I foresee particularly difficult reviews, even just procedurally, when some of the kids are in care and some are not. Some are in home. I'm not sure how those are going to go. We're going to have to schedule a lot of time for those reviews, or maybe schedule those kids kind of separately. I don't know. So we're going to have to figure that out. Just be patient with us as we kind of figure it out, because as you might have read, and if you haven't, I encourage you to read at least the document that shows you which findings we make at CRBs of children in home, because it's different. There's a lot of findings we don't make. So you should look at that as you're thinking about how to write your report, because you may set out to write all this stuff that we don't even need because we're not even going to make that particular finding. So I just encourage you, as you prepare for a review and are writing your report, which I know takes a lot of time because you all put so much work into those reports, let these guides kind of help you figure out what to focus on. When we are training our volunteers about how to facilitate these reviews, the biggest thing we're really trying to drive home is like, we want to, if kids have made it home, we really want to cheer this parent on. We want it to be like a very trauma informed, almost to the extent that we can, like a celebratory time to say, wow, congratulations, your kids are back. Great job. We want the parent to feel very safe in the space and encouraged. We also want to try and make them feel safe enough to say, hey, this part isn't going great. I could use a little more help here, because we do not have any control over a child being removed. So I just want parents, to the extent, if you are on a case and you talk to the parents a lot, and I know that's not always the situation with CASAs, but sometimes CASAs work closely with parents and sometimes they don't. So whatever your situation is fine. But if you do have a relationship with a parent on your case and they're looking ahead to this CRB review, I think every type of proceeding, whether it's a CRB or a court hearing, is a big deal for a parent. So like, to the extent that you can say like, hey, the board has no authority to remove your child again. So you don't need to even worry about that when you go in. Just know that they want to hear how you're doing and they want to get services in place to help you do better, even if you need them. So that's kind of what that's what we've really talked to our volunteers about. We're not going at these reviews to look for the problem areas, to see what's going wrong and honing in on that and like making the parent feel bad about the things that are going wrong. We want to celebrate the things that are going right and do everything we can to ensure that they have what they need to set them up for success for case closure. So that's kind of the spirit of the review. So, and that's a big training piece for me with my volunteers. So I will be working with them on that. Any questions so far about what I'm talking about? It may not even end up applying to many of you looking ahead, but if it does, I hope this is useful. One thing that came up when I brought up the fact that we're going to be doing these reviews to DHS, which they were thrilled about, just kidding, is they were concerned that the board, well, not that the board necessarily, but that attorneys at reviews were going to be recommending case closure. Like, okay, this parent has met the conditions for return. Why is this case still open? That would come up. And maybe you've heard that sort of talked about at hearings, or I don't know. I assured them that that's not, I mean, I don't know any board member that I've got that's like in a hurry to close a case. I think we all want, like what April was saying, to make sure that the parent has more than enough to set them up for success. So you won't hear us make a recommendation to close a case. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to do that anyway. I think if anything, boards will want to, you might more often see a recommendation to say like, hey, take your time, like make sure that they're set up. And the other thing that Holly Catalina, who's, one of the program managers at DHS, she came to a little training with our volunteers about the differences between barriers for return and expected outcomes. Because once a child has, we're not necessarily working on the barriers for return as much. We're working on the expected outcomes piece, which you see in these family reports that the caseworkers write. So the discussion at reviews for these cases too will be more focused on the expected outcomes. Is the parent demonstrating these like lasting changes that we hope to see? So that's kind of what to expect from those reviews. We still make a finding about parental progress, but, assuming the parent's doing well, it's likely to be a yes finding, but that discussion is like, okay, so what more can we do for this family to set them up for success? I mean, if I were to summarize it in one sentence, it's like, what can we do for this family to set them up for success, to prepare them for case closure? What's missing that we can do for them? So that's kind of the summary of why we're doing these reviews and how they'll go. And again, I would just encourage you to look at these documents that I sent over if you have really specific questions. Some of them, my colleague also highlighted like definitions of terms of like what a trial reunification is, what the policy is from DHS on that. So you might just find some of that work useful too, as you're even just like, is you're making sure as you're working on a case, like is DHS doing what they're supposed to be doing for this family? So any questions for me? I know that was kind of a summary, but didn't want to go too deep into detail about it.
I think Leanne, did you want to ask your question they put in the chat?
Yes.
This is related to any case, but I'm referencing back to the mom with the 4 children and some of the obstacles for closing out her case. And I am wondering at that stage, are some of those obstacles, or is it primarily financial, or is it the different services that are still provided at that time? April, are you here?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I had to find my unmute button. I'd say all of the above. I mean, financial obstacles are always going to be a part of her situation, I think. But it's a lot of it is the services that, each of the, well, specifically 2 of the 4 boys in particular have a lot of like learning disabilities, and the schools are providing those services too, but she has this, it's almost organizational in some ways. Like it's a whole team helping her make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks. And I think that what's going to be hard for her is to be able to do that kind of organization almost for that many kids and keep track. And she has a range from a freshman in high school to a 2-year-old. Anybody that has that many kids is dealing with all that, but she definitely leans heavily on the support of other people right now that are helping her make it all run smoothly. So but yes, it's a combination of those things. And, she has housing assistance. She has a lot of things and some of that will stay in place once it closes, but she has somebody that helps her make sure all of that is worked. Her DHS caseworker really works hard for that family and really makes sure that all of it comes together for them. And I think that's going to be a hard loss for the whole family to not have her involved in their lives like that.
Okay. So Anna, with the CRB involvement in those cases, is the committee able to I recommend aftercare through DHS, or when a case is closed, I know DHS exits completely, but is there a manner that the CRB board can recommend to help these families?
Well, that's a very good question. I think there's preventative work that can and should be done before a case closes. There are supportive services out there that do not depend on DHS involvement. So to the extent that we can be recommending those things be in place, whether it's natural supports. So, one finding that often gets overlooked that we make is about the relative search. But it's something we are starting to focus a little bit more on, because if DHS isn't doing what they need to do to identify any possible relative, not just for placement, that's what our findings about, but it's really so much more than that. It's about support, so is there any relative out there who can help this family out after the case closes, and then asking the questions at the review. And I think this will be a phrase that I encourage board members to use more is, okay, which of the, is this service going to continue after case closure? Is this service going to continue after case closure? Who's going to be still in this family's life, and then kind of looking at that and assessing whether that's good enough for this family, and then recommending further things if we find that it's not. So I think we just need to be good about asking those questions at reviews, getting to the specifics of which of these is completely gone once the caseworker exits and which of these continues, and then talking together as a group and including CASAs, of course, in that discussion, parents, everybody, to say, is this good enough, or what else can we put in place before it closes? So, yeah. Any other questions specific to trial reunification stuff?
I guess, so from our end, what would be beneficial for our volunteers to either include in the reports now that this is kind of being updated? Or is there anything specific that you'd want us to be looking out for on cases that are on trial reunifications to make sure that we relay that to you, or
Yeah.
something for-
Great question. So I pulled up the template for your, I'm focusing on you guys, but I'm going to look at it just for a sec so that I can kind of look specifically at the template you guys use. We still really want to know how, you guys are the children's advocates. So we really look to CASA as always to see like, how is this kid doing? How is this sibling group doing? And are their needs being met through services and support? Are they getting enough time together? One thing that I think will come up is, when there's these like gradual, if it's a larger sibling group, gradual returns of one kid at a time. I'm all for that process so that we don't overwhelm the parent. But one thing that I will really want to know is like, are the siblings getting enough time together through that process, and what's in their best interest in that regard? And what does, if the child was, for example, placed in a different county, they're returning back to parent in Marion County, they have services in that county, what does the transition of services look like for that child? And how are we making sure that all of it that it'll be a smooth transition? I want to see that ODHS and legal parties are developing, we use this phrase transition plan too many different ways, but what I mean by it in this context is the transition from being in substitute care place in home with parents. So I'm not talking about like the ILP transition plan. I'm talking about, is there a plan written that parties agree upon to transition these children back into parents' care? And that should include transition of services. It should include, increasing amounts of time spent in home with the parent, overnights, things like that. Is that in place? And if not, draw that to our attention. If you're hearing a caseworker talk about like a 30-day, reunification timeline, but there's no plan yet in place, we'd really want to know about that and encourage that happen. So just continue to focus on advocating for the kids and what they need. But that's kind of what I would say. We don't look at your reports to learn about the history of the case. So I know you have that history section. I would just say to you all, it's probably helpful for reference for you or for anyone reading the report to have context for the case. I would say spend the least amount of time on that section, because we have a lot of other reports and documents that tell us about the history of the case. We love the CASA reports for so many reasons, one of which is it's the most up-to-date document that we get for any review. 100% of the time, it's the most up-to-date document. So focusing on the now and looking to the future is what we really look for with our CASA reports. So, yeah.
Thank you. The other question in the chat says, do you review ICWA cases?
Oh, yes. Yes, we do. We just don't have very many in Marion County. Yeah. Yeah, we do. We do. And our reviews look a little different, because we make active efforts findings just like the court does. So, we have more ICWA cases, I think, in like Eastern Oregon. So our boards over in those counties see a lot more ICWA cases than we do in Marion County.
If you don't mind just talking a little bit, speaking of like active and diligent efforts, what occurs if you have a no finding or several no findings for a case after you review it? What's the process like that afterwards?
Well, there's no internal process that happens for us necessarily. Although I will say that if we've made a bunch of no findings, especially like a no reasonable or no active efforts finding, we're probably going to add a recommendation that the court take a look at the case lickety split. I will say too, the court will probably do that on its own. They'll see our findings, see that there's problems, and either recommend that we review the case again within that 2 to 3 month period, or they'll schedule a hearing themselves. So, and that's just to specifically address the problems that we saw on the case, which if you've read my reports, I try to really like highlight. If we make a no finding, I'll say at the top of the body of the report of the finding, like, this is why we made the no finding. for this, this, and this reason. And then you'll usually see connected recommendations at the bottom of the report to address the issues that we saw. And I try to be specific when we don't liberally make that recommendation to the court to schedule a hearing. I try to be very mindful that we don't do that all the time, because then the court will be like, oh, they're just always recommending that we schedule these hearings. But I'll say we recommend the court schedule a hearing to address the fact that child has not received, for example, a mental health assessment, and this is causing a delay in their ability to access certain services or something, just to kind of address the specific problem that we saw. So that's usually the result. Now, if we make a no finding and then about reasonable efforts or active efforts specifically, and then the court proceeds to make no findings about that, then that can affect funding for that case. But you don't see that happen very often. So usually the hope is by the time the court sees it, that area of the case has been cleaned up a little bit, or at least the efforts are there. So good question. And then I'm open to any questions about CRB. So I'm here, or feedback even. How has your experience been at reviews? Something you think we could be doing better, focusing on more? Do you feel included at these reviews that you attend? Questions for me, anything at all.
I know you said that typically the review is going to be can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Oops. Now I can't hear you for some reason. I could, and now I can't.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Okay, new headsets. So the CRB, is it a minimum that a case would have at least one CRB hearing per year? Is that the minimum, or is it twice a year? Is there a minimum?
It varies. Yeah, I'd say minimum should be once a year.
Okay.
But sometimes there are none in a year. And that would only happen if the court is scheduling more frequent permanency hearings.
Okay.
I've noticed, and Marion County, this is something that came up because I was noticing that we weren't reviewing as many cases, and I was trying to figure out why that was. So I looked at our data, of which we collect a lot, and I was able to pull information about why we weren't reviewing, on every case that's open that we haven't reviewed in the last year. And there was a variety of reasons. A lot of them, it was because there were more frequently scheduled permanency hearings. And I discovered that in Marion County, the court schedules perm hearings every 6 months on adoption cases. So I'm able to pull that data and I'd like the board to review a case at least once a year. I think having eyes on it at least once a year is good. So that's not, I would say, a state program minimum. That's just me as the field manager in Marion County saying, I want our boards to be looking at every case once a year, at least. So I have a way of pulling that data and kind of looking at that once or twice a year to see which cases we haven't seen and making sure they get on the schedule. But most of the time it happens. So,
okay.
But when it's a new case, we review every new case of children entering care within the first 6 months. So at the 5 to 6 month mark, we will be reviewing those cases. And those are the ones that those times are usually set by the court at jurisdiction.
Okay.
So
that answered my questions. I've been on a case for a year now, and I haven't had a CRB, but I believe one was done before I joined the case. And I'm a new CASA, so I've never done a CRB, so I don't know.
Okay. Great. Yeah. And it's not perfect. We have our own internal tracking system of how we can figure out which cases are due for review. And that's when you'll get notice.
Yeah, but my case has had a lot of permanency hearings before the judge, so I think that makes sense then. Yeah,
that's probably why. I mean, I believe the board should review cases at least once a year. However, like if the court is doing all these perm hearings, like it's a lot of work for everyone to come together and talk about it. And I don't see a reason to I really try to avoid conflicting perm hearings and CRB hearings within the same month or even 2 months of each other, because it's just a lot for everybody. So it's a balancing act for me with scheduling, but.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Leanne.
I have a question, because we've had CRB hearings and then we get the CRB review board's recommendations for it. And I'm going back in the past, not on some of the more current ones we've had, but where there have been things that need to be taken care of or looked at. The CRB notes that. And then once upon a time, I saw the response that came back from DHS. I believe they're supposed to respond within a certain amount of time. And
if they don't intend to implement our recommendations, yes. Only if they don't intend to implement the recommendations that we make would they reply to us.
Oh.
I will say, though, they don't implement certain recommendations and we also don't get replies. So I think of only one supervisor over there who actually sends the letter over to me on the regular about those. Megan Schmidt is the one I hear from the most, for sure. She's great. But if they don't send us a response, then the expectation is that they're doing those recommendations. But yeah, those responses don't go to all parties.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, thank you very much. Because I was going to comment that the response that I actually did see on one, and this was, I'd have to go way back and look, it was so vague as to be almost disrespectful. And I wanted to know, are there certain formalities that should be followed in response to, we would like to see this? Oh, well, yeah, we did that. Not instead of, we scheduled an appointment for this child with this counseling, whatever, on such and such a date, and visits are ongoing. Or is that asking too much?
Too much. I don't know. I mean, I'd appreciate, respectful communication. I can't think of an example like what you're talking about. Occasionally, this hasn't happened as much recently, but when I was more newly assigned to Marion County, like all the boards in Marion County, I was getting more correspondence from ODHS leadership about how reviews were going. And sometimes caseworkers have really bad experiences at reviews. And sometimes it's because the case is a mess and it's really hard to manage. Sometimes it's because they are dropping the ball. Sometimes it's because our board members get visibly frustrated at how the case is going, and that's hard on them. So that one is one that I try to work on with my volunteers because I feel like I have some control over that. Something so occasionally I'll get an email or, feedback from a supervisor about that. And I try to really work with them on that. I want to hear from them if their caseworkers really have a bad experience at a review, because I don't want that to happen. That's not the point. I want it to be at least a useful time, even if it's difficult. It doesn't mean we're always going to agree, but there's no reason for a caseworker to leave feeling just like crushed. So I don't want that. So it's kind of we want to hold them accountable, and and work together at the same time. So that's something I am working on. I think our boards do a really good job of that on the whole. Yeah.
We've got another question in the chat here. How long between the CRB review and when the court sees your reports?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly. I know, you know, I try to finish up. I have a lot of cases that I'm swimming in all the time. So after review, I try and finish those reports really quick because I have like another day of reviews, like the next day sometimes, or in just a few days, and I can't keep them all straight in my head. So I really try and like get the reports done quick. And that's just me. We're not, as a program, required to send them out earlier than 21 days after the review, but I know we do. Because when I send them over to our program coordinator staff, who's kind of the more internal, shuffling the paperwork, getting everything, he's really quick about sending those out. So that is the only timeline I can guarantee is like, I'd say our reports get sent out minimum within 2 weeks of a CRB review. However, I can't tell you when the judge actually reads it. So I think generally they do rather quickly, but I couldn't say for sure. So yeah, it ends up on their desk and the rest is up to them. So yeah. Also, I should add, just on the topic of the trial reunification, I'm meeting with Judge Perez and Judge Underwood next week to kind of talk about how the scheduling, how we can work together on scheduling or not scheduling these trial reunification cases. I'm curious to hear from them what they want. You know, if Marion County is meeting largely this standard of having a review within that 60-day time frame, does the CRB need to jump in at all? You know, or is it helpful on a case or maybe certain cases? So I'm curious to hear from the judges what they think when we really start scheduling these more actively, or at least we have the ability to. Because again, I don't want to overwhelm everybody with more reports, more things to do when there's already so much work being done to support the families. But I do want to help to the extent that we can help and review cases that need to be reviewed. So I'll be working with the judges on that as well. Mm-hmm.
I guess I fall into here. I have kind of a question. Maybe it's more for CASA, kind of, but do the 10 questions that's done at CRB, do CASAs have a copy of that blank? I mean, it might, I was just thinking, because I don't ever recall, I do both, and I don't ever recall the CASA actually having the list of the 10 questions before I fill out a CASA report. And sometimes I'm wondering if that could be helpful to the CASAs if they know what the 10 questions are when then they're filling in the ones that they want to do. But I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah, is that part of any materials that?
I don't think we, at least I haven't since I've been here, have seen a copy of that. I do.
Oh, well, I'll send one over.
I was told when I was initially hired that our court report was supposed to kind of line up with some of the questions that were being asked. But yeah, I don't think, Lisa, that I haven't seen like an actual like official copy of the CRB questions. So that would be very helpful, actually.
Yeah, I can send that over.
I do have a copy of that. I cannot remember where I acquired that copy. And for whatever reason, I didn't always have it close to where I had the CRB template for my CRB report. But I've seen it.
Good. Well, I just would say, as you're thinking about writing your report for any case, if it might help you get started if you look at the questions that you know we'll be asking. I mean, we'll be asking a lot of like subsequent questions within each of these findings, but it would help you maybe have a starting point for what, you know, we'll be focusing on. And I would say finding 3A has ODHS insured safety, health, and well-being of the child or children in care, that's where we spend the most time. And that's a huge piece where CASA can provide a lot of good information for us. So. But it's not limited to that. I'm just saying, because we want to hear your perspective about parent progress, if the plan's still reunification, all that. But I would just say, you know, we really want to hear your angle on how the kids are doing, especially. And I really want you to know how much we love you. We really love CASAs. I love CASAs so much. I used to work at CASA up in Multnomah County. I used to be a CASA up in Multnomah County. I have a deep love and appreciation for CASAs and all the work that you do. And just thank you for everything, because truly can't say that enough. It's so essential. It's an essential role. And it's really, the boards love you guys, and we really appreciate your work and your reports and anything you contribute at a review. So
yeah, thank
wonderful.
you. I just had another quick follow-up question. I mean, it's not necessarily super important, but I was just wondering, how many people do you have on staff here in Marion County, and how many volunteers do you have?
Oh, so not staff, volunteers. How many volunteers do we have? Because I'm the only staff in Marion County. Okay. So, well, I guess there's my program coordinator, Craig. So there's me and Craig in Marion County. We have, oh shoot, we need more people. I'll do a little recruitment pitch. We could use more people, especially for our teen and young adult boards. Hard, Paul knows, he's on one of them. Hard to keep people on those boards. It's not cut out. I've been trying to recruit, you know, his wife, Diana. We need more people. Anyway, I'm not going to steal your CASAs. If you know anyone, is all I'm saying. But I'm trying to think. We have 5 boards, so I'd say we have around 18 to 20 total volunteers in Marion County. I didn't actually count them all out in my head because that would take a second, but that's my best guess.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what are you looking for in a member of the board? Like,
well, someone who is obviously deeply cares about the well-being of children and families in foster care, but it's can't be someone who wants to spend time with the kids. So like that's where CASA's. If I had a person come to me to say, I can't wait to spend time with the kids, I'd send them directly over to the CASA program, because that's not what we do. It's a lot of like record review, internalizing the information, thinking of critical questions, finding holes in the plan, and bringing that to the team and facilitating the review. So it isn't a specific type of person. We do have a number of people who are, retired nurses, teachers, attorneys. They gravitate to us, but none of that is a requirement. In fact, I really like it when we have people who are totally green to the system coming in, because it's just we want that like fresh look. The same way I think that the CASA program wants that on a case. We don't want another attorney on the case. I mean, it's okay if you've been an attorney, but it's like, that's not the point. The point is to bring like a fresh citizen community voice into this case and inform how it proceeds. So I just, it needs to be someone who's willing to spend a lot of time reading reports and has an opening one day a month to serve on the board. So in some ways, it's a nice schedule because it's very predictable, So the CASA commitment is bigger, I think, in terms of time than the CRB role. Because the CRB role is just one day a month and then reading the records, and it's very predictable in that regard. So, and they have to live or work in Marion County. I guess that's the one actual requirement. They have to live or work in Marion County. So,
yeah. How many people from the board hear the cases? Is it just one per case, or is there multiple?
What was the question?
How many people attend the hearings? Just one person.
It varies. I mean, caseworkers are required to be there. DHS attorneys in Marion County are great about coming. I will say statewide, that can vary more. I don't know why that is, but the consortium in Marion County is excellent in terms of their presence and advocacy at reviews. So if an attorney isn't there, usually they'll send a sub or bare minimum their assistant to review CASA. So, it depends on the size of the case, but usually we have at least 3 or 4 people in attendance, and then even more when family comes and resource parents and stuff. So we really pack the room sometimes, but other times, if it's a case of a youth who's been in care a really long time and they have a permanent placement and an attorney and a caseworker, it's 2 or 3 people, but most of the time it's more than that. So
thanks. Another question in the chat here. How much time does the CRB prefer to receive the CASA reports before the hearing dates?
I would love it if they came in at least a week before, but I know that's hard. So I'll leave it at that and just know, I know that that's hard. I will say there have been times, and I can't speak to why or how this would happen, when I show up to the review day and there's a CASA report for one of the cases that day in my mailbox. And I'm like, ugh, that's too bad. So if you're getting to the point where it's really running late and you just can't get it in before the day of the review, don't write it. Just show up to the review and give us a really good verbal report, because chances are you'll have put all this work into a report that the board won't even have had time to read if we're getting it the day of the review. I try my best when that happens, though, to at least read the report out loud to the board if we have time before the case. But a week before the review is great. 3 to 5 days, let's say that's the minimum. Business days. So, yeah. I feel so bad when that happens, because I know how hard you work on the reviews, and I want the boards to read them. It's just logistically we have to have a way to actually get it to them, before the day of the review. So,
could I add comment to that?
Sure.
Also, since I do CRB also, we can get up between 3 and 6 or 7 cases in a day that we're going to have to listen to and review. And the CASA reports, the sooner we can get them, it makes it a lot easier going through all the material that we have to do so that we can build up our questions. So that's one of the real helpful things of the CASAs, is that they can give us a lot of information that we may have to go through 200 or 300 pages sometimes to find that same information. So it's just really helpful in that way. So the sooner the better.
So true, Paul. And, sometimes, especially on earlier, newer cases where there's so many things changing very quickly, we might see a DHS report that's 3 or 4 months old and say, oh, this parent's in this treatment program and this kid's living over with this relative. And so we'll be going through that and we'll make all our notes accordingly. And then we'll get the CASA report and it's oh, the parent relapsed and left treatment and this child has moved to a different placement. And so it's whoa, this, it's in a totally different space. And I mean, we're used to that. I do my preparations for cases and I hold on to them pretty loosely because I know that things can change very fast on these cases. So it's not a big deal to change my notes. But I think Paul's point is a good one. You guys, like I said, it's the most up-to-date document we get. So we love it as soon as possible, but I know that you don't get a ton of notice and there isn't much I can do about that. So if that was a question burning in the back of anyone's mind, I'm going to tell you right now, there's really nothing I can do about the length of time of notice that I can give you. We've already bumped it out a couple of weeks as a program, and that's about as good as it's going to get. So hopefully the notice we give to the program, you get quickly and then but I wish there was more we could do. So that's the best we can do.
Thank you. Any other kind of last minute questions from anybody? Once, twice. Doesn't look like it.
Well, I just want to repeat that I really love you guys. I love the work